Apologize to my boss or leave my house. That's what she said. Right there at the dinner table, candles lit, good wine poured, her mother seated to her left and Raymond Voss, her boss, her guest, sitting directly across from me with a smile that had been carefully designed to look like it wasn't enjoying any of this. Hannah's voice when she said it was controlled, rehearsed, the kind of calm that isn't calm at all. It's just anger that's been ironed flat and dressed up for company. I looked at her. I waited for something to move in her face, some flicker of hesitation, some signal that she knew how far across a line she had just stepped. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were steady. She meant every syllable. I looked at Raymond. He picked up his wine glass with 2 fingers, the way men do when they want to appear unbothered while they watch something go exactly the way they planned. I looked at Dorothy, Hannah's mother, seated right there at our table, a woman who had smiled tightly at me the first time Hannah brought me home and later told her daughter privately that nice doesn't build a future. Dorothy didn't flinch. She didn't look at me. She reached forward and broke off a small piece of bread. That small movement, the bread, the calm, the absolute absence of shock on her face, told me that everyone at this table had known this moment was coming before I sat down. Everyone except me. I'd grown up in a house in rural Ohio where my father worked double shifts and my mother stretched every dollar until it was transparent. I learned early that dignity wasn't given. You constructed it carefully, protected it quietly, and you never, ever let someone take it from you in public. I had carried that lesson through 2 decades of professional life, through every room where someone underestimated me, through every meeting where I was the only person who looked like me. I had carried it all the way to this table. And 7 years before this dinner, before Hannah, before this house, I had sat in a room of 200 colleagues while a manager accused me publicly of submitting incorrect data. I had sat there, nodded, said, "I'll look into it." The data was correct. He never apologized. I left that company eventually, but what I never forgave myself for, what woke me up sometimes at 3 a.m. even now, was staying in that chair, sitting still while someone performed my humiliation for an audience. I had promised myself I would never do that again. Hannah didn't know about that promise. She'd never asked about that meeting. And right now, looking at me across our dinner table, she was about to find out exactly what that promise cost. I unfolded my napkin from my lap, placed it beside my plate with both hands, very deliberately, very quietly, pushed my chair back, stood up. "Okay," I said. Just that. One word. And I walked to the door. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. Nobody moved. That's the part Hannah never talks about when she tells this story now. That for 3 full seconds after the front door closed behind me, nobody at that table moved a single muscle. Not her, not Dorothy, not Raymond, with his wine glass still raised halfway to his lips like a photograph of a man pretending to be relaxed. They had all modeled this moment. They had rehearsed it in their heads the way people rehearse confrontations they believe they've already won. They had built a version of tonight where Jeffrey Benson paused at the door, felt the weight of the room, and walked back to his chair. They had not built a version where they heard my keys lift off the hook by the door. They had not built a version where they heard the door open, then close, then my car starting, then the driveway going quiet. I found out later, from Hannah herself, in the honesty that came much later, that it was Dorothy who moved first, not to comfort her daughter, not to say anything particularly warm. She set her wine glass down, looked at the empty chair where I had been sitting, and said quietly, "Well," just that one word, the way you'd respond to something you'd half expected, but still found unpleasant when it arrived. Raymond cleared his throat and said something about not wanting the evening to end on a difficult note. Hannah told me she didn't hear the rest of the sentence. She was staring at my plate, the food still on it, the napkin folded neatly beside it, which for some reason was the detail that cracked something open in her chest. The neatness of it, the deliberateness, the fact that even walking out I hadn't made a mess for anyone to clean up. She pulled out her phone. She typed, "You need to come back and handle this like an adult." She stared at the screen. 1 minute passed, 2. The message sat there with its single gray check mark, delivered, not read. She typed again, Jeffrey. Just my name, the way she used it when she wanted me to understand she was serious. Nothing. She put the phone face down on the table. I want to tell you what was happening on my end during those minutes, because it matters. I was 11 minutes from the house, parked in the lot of a gas station I'd pulled into because my hands needed somewhere to be, and driving wasn't it. I had seen her messages come through. Both of them. I had looked at the screen for a long moment, at my own name, typed by my wife, demanding I return, and I had felt something clarify inside me the way things do when the noise finally stops. She had called it her house. I had paid the last 4 mortgage installments alone while Hannah's firm restructured and her salary was cut. I had repainted the guest room, fixed the porch railing, driven 2 hours to find the specific dining table Hannah had seen in a catalog and decided she couldn't live without. I had done every single one of those things, without ever once thinking of it as anything other than ours. She had called it her house. I put my phone in the cup holder, started the car, and drove the 4 hours to my brother Calvin's place in a kind of focused quiet I hadn't felt in a very long time, while behind me, Hannah sat at a dinner table that was getting cold, next to a man who was already calculating what my empty chair meant for him. Calvin didn't ask questions when I showed up at his door at past midnight with no bag and no explanation. He just looked at my face, stepped aside, and let me in. That's the thing about a man who's been through his own divorce. He recognizes the particular exhaustion of someone whose foundation just shifted. He made coffee. We sat at his kitchen table. I told him everything in the flat, factual way you tell things when you're still too close to feel them properly. When I finished, Calvin wrapped both hands around his mug and said, "Did you see it coming?" I thought about Hannah's folder on the shared computer, the one titled Options. The attorney consultation notes inside it, dated 4 months ago. I had found it by accident 3 weeks earlier, had clicked it open thinking it was tax documents, had read 2 lines, and had quietly closed it and made dinner like nothing happened. "Yeah," I said. "I think I did." Calvin nodded slowly. He didn't offer advice, didn't tell me what to do. He just reached over and turned the kitchen light down slightly, the way you do when someone needs the room to feel smaller, and we sat there together in the kind of silence that is its own form of brother language. Scene 4. Hannah made calls the next morning. I know this because people told me afterward, unprompted, the way people do when they feel guilty about what they participated in. She called her sister first, told her Jeffrey had embarrassed her in front of her boss, and stormed out like a child. Then Deborah, then her cousin, who had met me exactly once at a birthday party 3 years ago. Each conversation, my behavior got slightly worse. Each retelling, she was slightly more wronged. But something kept happening that she hadn't anticipated. Her sister said, "Hannah, why was your boss at your dinner table?" Deborah said, "Wait, he didn't yell, he just left?" Her cousin said, "That doesn't sound like what you're describing." And then Dorothy called. Her own mother. The woman who had watched every second of it from 3 feet away and hadn't blinked. Dorothy said, "You gave a man who has never raised his voice at you an ultimatum in front of your boss." And he stood up quietly and left. "That's not a man who is wrong, Hannah. That's a man who is done." Hannah told me later that the word done was what finally made her hands shake. Scene 5. On the second day, Calvin handed me a hammer, and we framed a wall together for 6 hours without discussing Hannah once. That was his way of helping. Not talk, but motion. Purposeful, physical, honest work, where the result of your effort was visible and solid and real. I needed that more than I needed any conversation. Around hour 4, while I was holding a beam in place and Calvin was driving nails, I thought about the first time I understood I was in love with Hannah. We were 2 years in, sitting on the floor of our first apartment, surrounded by moving boxes, eating cold pizza because we hadn't unpacked the plates yet. She had looked around at the chaos and laughed, genuinely laughed, not performing happiness but actually feeling it, and said, "I love that none of this is figured out yet." I had married that woman, the one who found joy in the unfinished. Somewhere in the years that followed, without either of us marking the moment it happened, we had stopped being unfinished together and started being separately complete. 2 people maintaining a household instead of building a life. I drove a nail through solid wood and didn't let myself cry. Calvin pretended not to notice that I almost did. Scene 6. Patricia Okafor called on the second night. Patricia was Hannah's colleague. Quiet, principled, the kind of person who remembered everything and said very little. We had spoken maybe 4 times total. There was no casual reason for her name to be on my phone screen at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. I picked up immediately. In 11 minutes, I learned the following. That the campaign which had saved Hannah's department 2 years ago, the one Raymond had used to cement his own reputation upstairs, had been Hannah's concept from foundation to execution. He had presented it to the executive board without Hannah's name on a single slide. Patricia had the original deck. She had kept it for months, unsure what to do with it, watching Raymond take credit in meeting after meeting while Hannah smiled and said nothing because she believed she owed him her job. Then Patricia said the thing that changed the temperature of everything. "Jeffrey, Raymond has been talking to Hannah about your marriage. She's been confiding in him. I think she thought he was a mentor. He's been using it to shape how she sees you, slowly, for a long time." I stood in Calvin's driveway for a long time after the call ended, gravel under my shoes, looking at nothing. Scene 7. I called attorney Gregory Walsh the next morning, standing in that same driveway, sunrise breaking through pine trees, my breath visible in the cold air. I didn't want to make this call. I made it because Hannah had made hers 4 months ago. I told Gregory 3 things. The folder on the computer, what Patricia told me, and the exact words Hannah had said at the dinner table. He listened without interrupting, which I respected. When I finished, he asked, "Do you want to save the marriage or protect yourself?" I stood there in the gravel and thought about Hannah laughing on that apartment floor surrounded by boxes. I thought about the miscarriage we never fully talked about afterward. The job loss I weathered alone because she didn't know how to sit with my failure. The slow, quiet way 2 people can grow a distance between them without ever choosing to. "I don't know yet," I told Gregory honestly, "but I'm done being the only person in this marriage without information." He told me what steps to take. I wrote everything down, then I drove home. Scene 8. Hannah opened the door before I reached it. She had heard my car. I could tell by how quickly she appeared. She'd been watching the window, maybe for a while. She was still in the clothes she'd slept in. Her eyes were the specific red of someone who had cried recently, but was currently holding themselves together by sheer decision. I came inside, set my bag down. She started to speak, and I held up one hand, not unkindly, just firmly, and said, "Let me go first." I sat at the same dinner table, same chair. I told her about the folder on the computer and watched the color leave her face. I told her about Patricia's call and watched her eyes go very still. I told her about Raymond's slide deck, Hannah's work, Hannah's strategy, Hannah's language, presented upstairs without her name, and watched something move through her expression that was past embarrassment, past anger, something deep and slow and devastating. When I finished, I reached into my jacket and slid 3 printed pages across the table. The original deck, her name in the author field, her words in every bullet point. She picked it up with both hands and began to read. Scene 9. She recognized her own thinking immediately. I watched it happen. The precise moment she saw her own language coming back to her from a document that had been stripped of her name and presented to people who made decisions about her future. Her hand tightened on the paper. Her jaw locked the way it did when she was holding something enormous very carefully. "He presented this," she said, not a question, "to your executive board, 8 months ago, without your name." She set the pages down. The silence that followed was long and specific. Then, "You knew." 3 weeks, I said. "Why didn't you say something?" I looked at her steadily across that table and said the truest thing I'd said in months. "Because you didn't ask me about anything. You found an attorney instead." The air went out of the room. She looked at the table. I looked at her. 9 years of marriage sat between us like something that had been left out in weather, still recognizable, still meaningful, but changed in ways that couldn't be undone by simply bringing it back inside. "Jeffrey, I'm not done," I said quietly. Scene 10. I told her about Raymond's pattern with her, how Patricia had described months of careful incremental conversation, small comments about my temperament, sympathetic questions about our arguments, the slow work of a man repositioning himself as her confidant by making her husband feel like her problem. Hannah listened without defending herself, which told me she was already recognizing the shape of it. The way you recognize something you half knew but refused to name. I thought he understood me, she said finally, her voice very small. He understood what you told him, I said, and he used it. She pressed both hands flat on the table, a gesture I recognized. She did it when she was trying to physically hold herself steady. I set that dinner up, she said. I staged it. I genuinely believed you had been rude to him, and I was too embarrassed to ask you directly, so I just... She stopped. I built a trap and put my husband in it and handed the key to someone who was stealing from me the entire time. She said it like she was reading a sentence that had been written about someone else and was only now understanding it was about her. I said nothing. Sometimes the most important thing you can offer someone is room to hear themselves clearly. Scene 11. I slept in the guest room, not dramatically, no announcement, no argument about it. I simply took a pillow and walked down the hall and closed the door quietly. At 2:17 a.m. it opened. Hannah stood in the dark doorway. I could hear her breathing before she spoke. I stopped assuming you were the good guy first, she said. Somewhere in the last 2 years I stopped doing that, and I don't even know exactly when it happened, and that terrifies me. I sat up slowly. Raymond helped it along, I said. I know, but I let him. Her voice broke on that last word, not dramatically, just cleanly, the way something breaks when the pressure has been building long enough. I let him because some part of me wanted someone to confirm what I was too afraid to say out loud, that we were losing each other. And instead of saying it to you, I handed that fear to someone who weaponized it. The room was very quiet. What do we do? She whispered. I thought about Calvin's wall, about what it meant to build something you could trust the weight of. We tell each other the truth, I said, starting now, about everything. Scene 12. Hannah walked into Raymond's office at 9:05 a.m. on Monday and did not sit down. She placed 3 documents on his desk: the original slide deck with her name restored to the author field, a formal HR complaint she had drafted over the weekend, and a signed lateral transfer request already approved by a VP she had called privately on Friday. Raymond looked at the papers, then at her. He opened his mouth. Don't, she said simply. She left his office, called me from the parking lot. It's done, she said. Are you okay? I think so. Are we okay? I thought about it the way I'd learned to think about things in 3 days, honestly, without performing an answer. We have to build it again, I said. Differently. I'm not going back to what it was. Neither am I, she said. That night we sat at the same table. No guests, no good wine glasses, no performance, just 2 people learning, slowly, imperfectly, for the first time in years, how to speak to each other without an audience deciding who was right. It wasn't fixed, it wasn't over, but it was finally, completely, honestly real. And for a man who had spent his whole life proving he deserved to stay in the room, real was the only foundation worth building on.